Episode 23 Deconstructing the Construct. This newsletter and podcast will almost certainly never have a truly massive audience. That's not a complaint, merely a statement of probability. What most Americans believe about their past is wrong. What most Americans believe about their own ancestry is wrong. Most American history remains untaught because most people prefer a self-congratulatory mythology. The current president of the USA is actively erasing the history of Black and Brown Americans from public documents and public spaces. Reporting the past with accuracy and relative objectivity, otherwise known as speaking the truth, is now being characterized as radical left ideology. Truth is neither right nor left. It is simply the truth. Capitalism, in its current form, is destroying democracy and what humans call the natural world. That is the truth. The political system in the USA is owned and controlled by billionaires and special interest groups, including oil corporations, cryptocurrency speculators, weapons manufacturers, the big data technocracy, and the Israel lobby. That is the truth. The USA maintains military bases around the world to protect the interests of big capital. The USA fought a war in Iraq this century to protect and further enrich big capital, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of women and children in the process. The USA, its politicians, and the people who elected them are fully complicit in the genocide now taking place in Palestine. Again, the truth. U.S. citizens today who do nothing in the face of such genocide are no better, no worse than the German non-combatants who watched in silence as Jews, gypsies, leftists, and homosexuals were rounded up and murdered 80 to 85 years ago in Europe. Americans have been perfectly content to munch on chicken wings while watching representatives of their armed forces march around football fields, never once questioning, never mind booing, the men and women visiting death and destruction on the innocent men and women and children of places like Iraq, because they are brown, or Muslim, or just far away. And besides, shouldn't we be more worried about the price of eggs? And that boy with blue hair working at the local gas station? The long American century of laundering the spoils of empire in faraway lands, out of the sight and common knowledge of an oblivious and incurious American citizenry, is over. The rich and powerful are now dividing the world into Orwellian zones of interest, where the catastrophic outfall of environmental pillage, climate change, will soon become intolerable for vast numbers of people everywhere. As famine and economic collapse spreads, we will begin to see mass migration on a scale never seen before in history. The ongoing formation of extreme right, authoritarian and fascist states in many former democracies is a reaction by big capital as they seek to consolidate and hold their obscene wealth in the face of expected civil unrest. The mask is off, and the ultra-wealthy are turning their malevolent gaze inward upon their own populations. For now, the violent goons of ICE are merely testing the waters. American citizens who think that the paramilitaries serving Project 2025 will only come after so-called illegal immigrants are profoundly mistaken. Today, it is black and brown and trans people in the crosshairs. Tomorrow, it will be you and me. As the recent murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy have amply demonstrated. Fascism never stops until it is stopped. Hello, I'm your host, Brian Halpin. Welcome to the time before we were white. We are only human. And reading about the darkness spreading from Mordor every day can become overwhelming and oppressive. Writing about the hidden aspects of our shared history, for example, the number of Black Americans alive today who are the direct descendants of American presidents, can easily be twisted and construed by Trump supporters as the obsession of a person who hates America. As I've written recently, it is entirely possible to love many things about American culture and the American people without buying into the jingoistic faux patriotism of white nationalist Christo-fascists. I love corn dogs and snow cones and cheeseburgers and pecan pie and street shawarma and maple syrup and root beer and tacos and barbecue ribs. I love freight trains and ponderosa pines and Saguaro cactus and the old-style salt and sugar shakers in roadside diners, and even the way a single mother in her late 30s doing the waitress work there always seems to have a look of impatience, pity, and forgiveness in her eyes, simultaneously. I love old step-side pickup trucks and engines that can be fixed without a supercomputer. I love the blues and jazz and rock and roll and country and bluegrass and rap and grunge and folk and Cajun music, soul and gospel, and Appalachian shape note singing. I love Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin. And I love Waylon and Willie and Merle. I love American writers, from Hawthorne to Hemingway, from Melville to Morrison. I love Navajo jewelry, swamp cypress trees, lightning bugs, drive-in movies, the sound of locusts and coyotes, and the smell of magnolia and honeysuckle. I could go on and on for hours, but I won't. Maybe most of all, I love the open-hearted, hearts on their sleeves, tired honesty, and guileless straight talk of so many working-class Americans. The USA was a deeply flawed project from the start. Hell, any story that begins with theft, slavery, greed, religious extremism, racism, bigotry, and shocking violence will need a lot of work in order to reach a happy ending. That much is true. But the recipe for fixing what's wrong won't be coming from a lying, racist conman and billionaire, a sexual predator, and a friend of pedophiles. Fixing what's wrong can only begin when we are collectively able to face into the truth of our shared past. But many, many Americans, of course, are the descendants of generations of people who absolutely did not want to talk about the terrible things they had done. So this means that many, many Americans have accepted the cozy bedtime story handed down to them. Hearing the truth would harsh their mellow. Ergo, I do not expect to ever find a particularly large audience. Besides, we now live in a world of clickbait headlines, sound bites, AI slop, and memes. The social and broadcast media owned by Trump's lickspittles favors content producers and influencers who churn out regular and easily digestible 30-second snacks. Cats, Andrew Tate getting punched, the We Are Charlie Kirk song, extended dance version. Scroll through, swipe left, swipe right through the interminable brain rot. The most popular social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, TikTok, all rewards content which supplies a quick dopamine rush or produces an immediate emotional reaction. Anger almost always produces a stronger reaction than other emotions. This rapid emotional reward system keeps a certain percentage of people forever checking for notifications on social media, where the steady diet of dopamine and targeted advertising ensures that the rich keep getting richer. Before We Were White is a bad content producer in a world of clips and reels and 140 character limits on text. Before We Were White is a bad content producer in a world where algorithms will push the content of those who interact or share the most online. This isn't great for a person like me who likes to hide in his cave for days and even weeks on end, researching and scribbling and researching, until popping his head out now and again to shout about what he just saw. Usually, there's so much to share that it takes a lot of words and a lot of time to say it. I tell myself that it's like the difference between ready-to-eat microwave lasagna and the homemade stuff that requires love, learning, tradition, and patience. I tell myself that many other things, like reading and writing, are also worth the time required to do them right. So, with that out of the way, here is a recording of my introductory blog written just over 5 years ago, when it seemed that with the chaos of the first Trump presidency over, more Americans might finally be ready and willing to ask, how did we get here? And how do we move forward? That was the one where I explained what I'm doing and why I do it. It's long, but not longer than necessary. The concept of race can be viewed from opposite ends of a long spectrum. At one end are scientists and geneticists who do not recognize the existence of separate races at all. at the other end of the spectrum are, well, racists. In common parlance, racist has come to simply mean a person who hates other people based on their perceived race. But this is not the whole picture. Any person, even a very nice person, who believes that a human being with ancestry from a specific geographic region with a certain outward appearance is fundamentally different to certain others is also a racist of sorts. When we hold popular folk beliefs, such as Koreans are born better at math, or African Americans have natural rhythm, or Jewish people are prone to neuroticism, that is also racism, whether ill-intended or not. Of course, the most extreme racists believe that some human beings are innately superior to other humans due to genetic inheritance. Period. Between these poles are anthropologists, social activists, cultural commentators, writers, artists, and most of the rest of us. People who, for various reasons, choose to accept the concept of races, if only as a simple shorthand way of describing the lived experience of specific cultural or ethnic groupings. It's very easy for a certain class of contemporary, educated liberal to proclaim that race is a social construct, without ever needing to lay out exactly what that means, especially when people clearly suffer real-world consequences due to their apparent race. Even the most kind-hearted, non-bigoted person in the world will look at someone from sub-Saharan Africa and someone from Korea and say, come on, they're not the same race. How can race be a social construct if certain population groups look so different to one another? This is a justified and legitimate question, and luckily it is a question which can be answered. Not with a simple answer, mind you, but with an answer nonetheless. That is where this blog and podcast comes in. This is not a science blog or podcast. This is a history podcast written for non-academics. For over 500 years of American history post-Christopher Columbus, most people in the Americas have believed in race, as surely as most people in the Americas have believed in the Middle Eastern God of Abraham. So when we look at American history, it is of little use trying to interpret the common American understanding of race through the eyes of a scientist, because science didn't even begin to address the concept of race until the past century or so, in the post-Darwin age. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people with a vested interest in the existence of races, like slaveholders and colonialists, used Darwinian evolutionary theory to bolster what was called social Darwinism, and later the pseudoscience of eugenics. This effort to use science to underpin racial bigotry was not unlike the way certain religious groups interpret religious scripture in ways to suit their own personal desires and personal perception of what is right or moral. And while modern genetics has happily superseded fake science, it is still difficult to convince the man on the street that race is a social construct, even with the help of proper science. Maybe a different approach is needed. This newsletter and podcast almost always invites science in the door where appropriate, but for the most part, we try to view the world of the past through the eyes of our less schooled ancestors, the people who constructed the idea of races. A people living in a world of black people, white people, Chinamen, red Indians, mulattoes, half-breeds, and Asian Indians. A world of pagan savages, Christians, Hindus, and Mohammedans. Ask any contemporary heartland American, whether racist or non-racist, what's in their ancestral melting pot, and one will invariably hear about Irish or Scots-Irish, along with English, Welsh, Scottish, German, and perhaps a few French, Dutch, Poles, Italians, and Scandinavians. Many today will even allow for a Cherokee great-grandmother, now that being part Indigenous American is fashionable rather than something to deny. Most of the aforementioned ancestors of heartland Americans are imagined to have been good and honest, hard-working, God-fearing white folks seeking a better life away from tyranny or religious persecution. When asked about their present ethnicity, these Heartlanders are the people most likely to self-identify simply as white and American. By now you will have noticed the repeated use of the term heartland. In a cultural political landscape which is currently deeply polarized, this word carries a lot of freight for both progressives and conservatives. It is important to make absolutely clear what is meant by the term heartland in the context of this publication and podcast. It is first and foremost not a simple coded slur for people in red hats who vote a certain way. It's also not an acceptable stand-in for other disparaging terms such as redneck, hillbilly, Bible thumper, or white trash. Throughout the life of this blog and podcast, heartland will always and only be used to mean the following: people and communities with deep and extensive roots in rural and small-town America, people and communities whose ancestors were directly involved in the events of the colonial and frontier eras, and people and communities who usually self-identify as being working class or middle class, Christian, white, and American. Those inclined to pay close attention to such things will notice that this description closely matches the profile of people being called legacy or heritage Americans by the Trump regime and its white Christian nationalist cheerleaders like J.D. Vance. These legacy or heritage Americans are by no means all paid-up members of the MAGA cult, however. Heartland Americans, whether part of MAGA or not, tend to be the people most inclined to say that they value ideals of liberty and freedom, and most Heartlanders see these almost sacred ideals as a direct byproduct of American exceptionalism. Buried in this description of Heartland America, though, are two tiny words with a universe of violence, war, and politics contained within them. And those two words are self-identity. Heartland Americans almost always self-identify as white. Heartland Americans on the whole, however, often claim to disdain identity politics. Identity politics is seen as a recent woke development in which liberal victim culture seeks to defy good old-fashioned common sense while trying to dictate which words Americans can use to describe others and the world they inhabit. In fact, the essence of American history, America's original sin, the dark heart at the core of all American mythology, has always been identity politics. One group self-identifies as X, and then claims exclusive rights to identify others as Y and Z. One group seeks to define what white or American means, and then presumes the right to decide who gets allowed in their gang. Of course, much of Heartland America hates identity politics today, especially those in the white Christian nationalist MAGA cult. They invented, accepted, and embraced the concept for centuries. And now they've lost control of it, and they want it back. For those people who choose to believe in the concept of race and choose to self-identify as white, what exactly counts as white in America? Let's set aside our distaste for a moment and entertain the definition of white people as promulgated by racists and white supremacists. To a white supremacist, the essence of whiteness is Central or Northern European ancestry. White supremacists are deeply, deeply enamored of historical groups like the Franks, and the Saxons, the Angles, the Celts, and of course their gold standard of whiteness, the people of Scandinavia, especially Vikings. To white supremacists, all things white and good radiate out from a Northern and Central European ancestral homeland into regions with lessening degrees of proper whiteness as one travels south and eastwards into the lands of southern Spain and Italy, into the dubiously Slavic Balkans and swarthy Greece, until reaching the doorstep of the Turks, Arabia, India, and on toward the Far East and, God forbid, down into darkest Africa. Almost every self-identified white Heartland American, if they cared to dig, would find that they utterly fail to clear this racial purity bar set by the many self-appointed gatekeepers of whiteness. In fact, if whiteness really is the exclusive preserve of Northern, North Central European peoples, then Heartland Americans, the people with deepest roots in underclass colonial America, are quite possibly the least white people to ever call themselves white. At least by the measure of their own white supremacist thought leaders. Bit of a contradiction in terms there, if you'll pardon it. The fact is, in American history, being white has almost nothing to do with actual genetic ancestry. Being white means belonging to a social caste conjured out of thin air, and one which is continuously mutable, depending on the prevailing social conditions. For example, in order to prevent themselves ever being outnumbered by a cohesive block of non-white minorities, members of the white social caste have had to slowly integrate various ethnic groups into their gang. People who once belonged to ethnic out-groups, the Irish, Slavs, Jews, Italians, and Latinos, have been grudgingly admitted to the white caste over time, usually in preferential order according to their language, religion, and shade of brownness. Many people today wrongly assume that racism, innate racism, caused or at least allowed slavery to develop. Over the past 5 years of this blog and podcast, we have discovered that the reverse is true. Greed and the desire for slave labor to feed this greed led humans to invent excuses and self-justifying arguments in favor of slavery. But first, an obvious difference between the enslavers and the enslaved had to be found. Some clear factor which could allow this othering to begin. Something able to gain widespread acceptance. Perhaps surprisingly, that obvious difference, at least in the beginning, was not skin color. During the 1600s, in a world steeped in Christian religiosity, with deeply ingrained social class systems, the people usually considered suitable for bonded servitude and enslavement could be drawn from many sources. The impoverished underclasses, orphaned children, criminals, prisoners of war, non-Christians such as Asian Indians, Moors, Sub-Saharan Africans, and indigenous Americans. Colonial America presented slaveholders with a singular problem, however. Indentured servants and slaves who looked relatively similar to their masters could always just up and run away. They could change their names and start a new life elsewhere. Native American slaves could disappear and blend back into their own communities beyond the frontier and reach of European settlements. This is why, over many decades, Africanness became the ultimate property tracking device. Racism was born of banal convenience. A Spaniard can look like a Berber. A Romany gypsy can look like a Shawnee Indian. A Portuguese person might look like a South Asian. An Italian might look Turkish. A mulatto might look Arab, Jewish, or Persian. Brown skin on its own can be a very ambiguous guide to a person's ethnic origins. But someone with sub-Saharan features can only rarely dispute having at least some sub-Saharan African ancestry. Just as someone with red hair, freckles, and blue eyes would find it hard to deny having some Northern European ancestry. Considering what the English were doing to Ireland in the early 1600s, at the exact same time they began to colonize America, the Irish might have easily become a permanently enslaved caste. If the genes for red hair were more prevalent in Ireland, and not recessive genes, the English might have had a clearer identifying marker for the Irish. At any rate, the trade in sub-Saharan African slaves begun by the Portuguese, Spanish and Dutch during the 1500s was taken up with gusto by the English in 1600s North America. Black became less about actual skin shade and color and more about specific identifying features or phenotypes. Until the late 1600s and early 1700s, when legislators and slaveholders finally settled on sub-Saharan Africans as their chosen slave caste, colonial America had really, truly, and actually been the melting pot of yore for many decades, especially among its disempowered underclasses. Most people today would be astonished to hear that in 1720, perhaps 20% of the population of Virginia colony was comprised of people classified as free blacks or free persons of color. Much of heartland America is in fact descended from this roiling, ethnically mixed underclass of convicts, indentured servants, the illegitimate, so-called illegitimate offspring of slaveholders and the enslaved, prostitutes, common day laborers, gypsies, fighters and soldiers, runaway slaves, land squatters, itinerant preachers, washerwomen, displaced and dispossessed indigenous peoples, spinners, ship-jumping sailors, beggars, slave traders, miners, dreamers, peddlers, hunters, trappers, pimps, and subsistence farmers, with ancestry drawn from 5 continents. Yes, 5 continents. Not 2, not 3. 5. The crude binary racial caste system created in colonial America during the late 1600s and early 1700s left a vast population of ethnically complex brown people embroiled in a decades and even centuries-long struggle to ensure their feet were planted firmly on the sunny side of the black-white divide. Marriage in those times often had little to do with natural sexual attraction or romantic love, and far more to do with property amalgamation, consolidation, and judicious steps in the direction of whiteness. A sort of silent and horrible, centuries-long, self-imposed system of selective, advantageous reproduction, if you will. To prevent backsliding from their improved, safer social caste status, once a person, family, or community reached the holy grail of whiteness, they then had to act white. Really, really white. Acting whiteness was founded upon a 3-legged stool of 1. Patriotism, expressed through voting and a willingness to take up arms, and a belief in American exceptionalism and the entire corpus of American foundational mythology. Number 2, Christianity, expressed through church attendance, the profession of faith, and testifying. And number 3, race supremacy, a deep-seated mistrust, fear of, and sense of superiority over those who did not look or act white enough. This performative culture has been going on for centuries, right up to the present day. We are now at the stage where there is a real danger that no one, bar a few specialist scholars, will be left to remember that American whiteness has always been an act, a confidence trick. The lie has been made flesh, the myth has been made reality. Project 2025 and American fascism are now set to codify and enforce with violence America's original lie. This podcast is not a liberal or leftist hatchet job on Heartland America. This writer and podcaster was born in Missouri and spent his childhood moving between there and Tennessee, Arizona, Mississippi, and Oklahoma, attending 10 different schools between 1970 and 1980, while his working class and, often deeply dysfunctional family chased after the American dream. We owned guns, we rode in the back of pickup trucks, we hunted and we fished. This writer was not educated in the hallowed halls of any Ivy League college. This writer is not unfamiliar with life in a trailer park, or with twice-a-week Bible school in an evangelical dunking church. This writer joined the army on his 17th birthday, like so many others with few prospects. Heartland Americans are my people, for better or for worse. Heartland America has always supplied the people willing to do the dirty work for the American political and industrialist classes and their pet projects. More often than not, they have been lied to, poorly rewarded, and ill-used by the governing elites of the nation they serve. But contrary to current evidence and much urban liberal orthodoxy, this USA heartland is not uniquely more foolish, bigoted, racist, or wicked than the people of any other place or nation. The USA as a whole, though, is highly unique in a couple of very fundamental ways. In the first instance, the historically recent mass acquisition of largely free or dirt-cheap land and resources, including slave labor and criminally cheap underclass immigrant labor, created a situation which allowed many white people of relatively poor educational attainment to achieve a higher living standard than similarly low-skilled people in most other places in the world. In the second instance, the USA is also utterly singular in the way its resultant wealth and military power has allowed it, more than any other nation, to project its own mythology, its own conjured reality and self-image, onto the world stage, all while steadfastly refusing to face into an accurate account of how land, resources, and fellow humans were acquired, occupied, sold, exploited, or murdered in order to generate this wealth and power. In 2026, the USA finds itself in an existential crisis, having become a nation almost at war with itself. This is the inevitable tornado created when the warm winds of mythology meet the cold winds of reality. If the USA is to survive this storm, America will have to survey the wreckage, save what is worth saving, and start from scratch. A new house will need to be built on better foundations, with a roof big enough to offer shelter to all its children, not just some. We must stop repeating the official stories told to us by the powerful and remember that indoctrination and leadership are not the same thing. Our forebears knew this. The songs they sang about it still exist. Train songs, Dust Bowl songs, coal mining songs. Change must begin within our own communities, for nothing is more powerful than the true stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Stories drawn from the reality of our own daily lived experiences, not the stories told by corporate-owned media. Renee Good was not a domestic terrorist, and Palestinians resisting the occupation and theft of their homeland are not terrorists. We must unbind the filthy poultice of official memory, which only serves to hide the gangrenous and gaping wound of secrets, lies, transgenerational trauma, and hypocrisy festering underneath. As the great American writer Cormac McCarthy might say, our cries are for an accounting, a proper accounting, or just the plain, unvarnished truth. As stated, this blog and podcast is not intended as a liberal hatchet job on Heartland America. It is merely a hacksaw, if you will, for the many good Americans who want to saw through and remove the heavy shackles of acting white. Let it be a dose of reality for those who are sick and tired of being forced to play a part in someone else's make-believe universe. Heartland American history and culture is far richer than can be described by a skin color, held under a MAGA hat, or wrapped up tidily in a flag. This blog and podcast is the product of almost 20 years of obsessive research into the real and oftentimes obscure ethnic origins and lives of thousands upon thousands of real Heartland American families. Using documentary, photographic, and the latest DNA evidence, this blog and podcast attempts to help set the record straight on one of the most enduring and damaging lies at the core of Heartland American self-identity: whiteness. And while writing can't fix the world, it can sometimes make the questioning people out there feel a little less alone and give them some of the information and strength they need for the daily struggle. Sometimes just knowing we are not alone is enough to help us keep on keeping on until better days come. Before We Were White is written and produced by me, Brian Halpin. Main theme and original music for this episode was composed and performed by Rory Keneally, Rodney Lancashire, Ray Cohen, and Cal Halpin. I cannot begin to offer adequate thanks to the many people who support this project via Patreon, Substack, and via generous once-off donations. Longtime followers will notice a change this year, in which I try to bring my website blog, Substack newsletters, and podcast episodes into a more synchronized structure. It is hoped that this will allow me to produce our podcasts with a greater degree of regularity, something which I believe I owe my loyal listeners and supporters. The simple truth is that I've been trying to do the work of a small team single-handedly. We're finally getting close to a point where some help might be brought aboard. In the meantime, thanks again to all of you who have kept the faith during these strangest of strange times. Love and peace.